Well, I have in the past been the last speaker at a conference. I remember one in 1982, something like that. It was in New York City at the Money Show, and I was on Saturday, the last day of the conference, Saturday afternoon. The very first speaker was Henry Kissinger, and it was standing room only with 2,000 people in the Hilton Hotel. And then after he spoke for an hour and took question and answer, the next speaker was Harry Browne, who, as a libertarian, had the #1 best-selling book in the New York Times at the time, and half the audience got up and walked out. After Harry Browne spoke for an hour, the final speaker was me, and the other half got up and walked out. So I'm glad to see most of you are sticking around for the final session of this conference. So I've been on a 2-week tour. I started in Milwaukee and spoke at the Wisconsin Forum and the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. I addressed high school students on libertarian thinking. It was really it's always fun to meet with high school students and try to influence their lives. And then I just finished a 2-day session, 2-day conference in Washington, D.C. with Vivek Ramaswamy. President Trump spoke via telephone. And you'll be happy to know Vivek is very enthusiastic. He takes a rather strong libertarian point of view. He says, we are going to gut the federal government. It's not going to happen, but that was the term he used. So he uses a lot of libertarian language. So it's, and I also heard Mike Johnson, the House Speaker and stuff. So they're ready to make a big difference, and they're all claiming for the very first time that they are going to eliminate the Department of Education. So if they do that, you know, Ronald Reagan said he was going to do it. All of the Republicans say they're going to eliminate the department. So this will be the true test, won't it? If they really are going to gut the federal government, you can start with the Department of Education. So I have given a wide, I've spoken to numerous colleges and universities in the last couple of years on this topic, what's better than democratic socialism? Now, why do I choose that topic? Because it attracts students who find socialism appealing. They're saying, when they see this title, and the title I leave off democratic capitalism. Okay, I'll leave that off. So the topic is, what is better than democratic socialism? And they're so intrigued by the topic that they show up in droves. What could possibly be better than democratic socialism? And so I start off by talking about how commercialism is king, and there's a lot of reasons why the old tradition of socialism has been rejected. And even Robert Heilbronner, a socialist who wrote The Worldly Philosophers, he himself admitted that capitalism does deliver the goods better than others. And so today's socialists, most of the time, do not advocate pure socialism of nationalization of all industries and so forth. They're more into regulation and progressive taxation and so forth. So anyway, capitalism has won the output race, and most socialists agree with that. So I'm going to move along here because this is normally an hour-long lecture, and I don't have that much time. But democratic socialism today is talking about minimum wages, guaranteed jobs, single-payer Medicare for all, socialized medicine in essence, free college tuition, universal basic income. These are some of the things, and progressive taxation is another. You know, constantly taxing the rich is a very strong advocacy, and these are the kind of things that appeal to these students. So I love this chart, or this cartoon. It's pretty good, that describes one of the problems with socialism. Work hard, keep half, no work, free stuff, and you can see where everybody's lining up. Pretty good humor. I'm going to go with this. I'm going to focus on this quote as the potential of the ideal society. It is this quote that students who are attracted to socialism find very appealing. And in fact, I have found, even when I have given this lecture at Hillsdale College, that the majority of Hillsdale students agree with this quote. You work hard and you get what you need. That's in essence how they interpret this statement. And I don't say where this statement comes from until later on, okay? But basically, you work hard to your ability and you get what you need. So then I ask students, well, what do you need? I say, put your economics hat on. I always wear a hat. This is my economics hat. When I teach at Chapman University, I always wear this hat and use it as a symbol of the economist putting on the economic hat and analyzing problems. They don't remember my name, but they remember the professor with the hat. So if you're wondering why I wear a hat indoors, I'm starting a new culture. All right. So we focus on the concept of the need. So students, how much do you need to live comfortably is the question I ask. Now at Hillsdale College in Michigan, they say 30,000, not too much. My students in California, they say, John, 100,000. And one student said, well, I need $250,000 to live comfortably for my Tesla car and so forth. So whatever it is, let's say it's $100,000, students. So my question is, what happens if you earn more than $100,000? What happens to that money? Do you get to keep it under this system? And the answer is no, you don't. It is all that money, anything you earn over $100,000, is put into the community fund. And the community fund is used to help those who possibly don't have the ability to earn what they need. They don't earn $100,000. They may earn $60,000. And so the community fund is used to make up the difference so that everybody gets what they need. That's what this statement says. So then I say, students, what is the marginal tax rate under this system? What is the tax rate above $100,000? And the answer is, Ken, you're a teacher? It's 100% marginal, but it's funny. A lot of my students really struggle with that question. Is it 50%, 40? I'm not sure. So anyway, it's 100%. And so it's like the light goes on. They realize right then and there's a problem with this statement. And the problem is that you lack incentive to earn more than $100,000. Now, maybe out of the goodness of your heart, you earn $100,000, but there's actually a disincentive. There's a disincentive. It's basically saying if you earn more than 100, we're going to tax it all away. So you can see there's a problem with socialism in terms of trying to achieve extraordinary above average returns. But then there's another problem. What about the person who earns $60,000 a year? Does that person have any incentive to earn more than $60,000? And the answer is no, because he or she automatically gets it back up to $100,000. So whether you're earning $20,000, $30,000, $60,000, you have no incentive to work more. This is the strongest argument I have ever seen that demonstrates, we hear all the time, socialism doesn't work. Doesn't work in Venezuela, doesn't work in Cuba, doesn't work in other East Germany and so forth. But their response is, well, it just wasn't done right. So you have to put on your economic hat and analyze why. And this explains why when you focus on the need factor and work with your students to realize if you have a program that taxes away anything above your needs, you destroy incentives and the system fails over and over again. So, 100% marginal tax rate, strong disincentives to work. And it's at that point I tell the students, this quote is from Karl Marx, and the Hillsdale College students feel really embarrassed that they fell for it. But I like Jack London. Jack London called himself a socialist with a small s. So did John Stuart Mill. But notice he makes a one-word, one-letter change that makes this work, doesn't it? From each according to his ability, you all work hard, to each according to his deeds. Deeds. He put in deeds. So that's capitalism, isn't it? That's a tax level that's reasonable enough that you have the incentive to continue to work. So I like Jack London's quote, to use a socialist who figured it out why there's a problem. So I also have a concept called the A&W principle. I don't have time to go into detail on the A&W principle, but the A&W principle in economics is a very powerful one. A stands for accountability, the user pays, and W is welfare. You help people who need help. But a corollary to that is you don't help people who don't need help. And even in welfare and church donations and so forth, you know better than to help people who don't need help. That's very dangerous, because then you lack incentives to get off the dole. So after we do the A&W, and that's a whole lecture in itself, then I pass out to all the students A&W root beer, and we toast the A&W principle. So I don't have time to go into that, but it's a fun exercise that I do in my classroom. So I'm going to talk now about the Henry Ford $5 a day story. Now this story is an extremely important one to understand why you cannot win this argument by just saying socialism doesn't work. That does not work as an argument, because you have to replace a bad idea with a good idea in order to win the debate. And that's what I try to do by arguing what's better than democratic socialism, Greg? It's democratic capitalism. And I know you don't want to use capitalism, you want to use human dignity and all that sort of thing, but you have to use terms that students understand. And when you put the word democratic in front of capitalism, it changes the way they view capitalism. Because there are various degrees of capitalism. There is exploitative capitalism. And Andrew Carnegie was really good at it. Andrew Carnegie became one of the wealthiest people in America, often at the expense of his workers. Not the consumers. He did a great job for customers and consumers. But if you read the Homestead riots that took place in 1892, you can understand why Marxists were making inroads with workers with exploitative capitalism, taking advantage of workers and denying them. He had Carnegie did an agreement with the unions there to reduce the workday from 12 hours a day to 8 hours a day. And and they said, yes, and we'll agree to raise wages. Well, he reversed himself completely, so that's why the strike took place. So labor-capital relations were really constantly in conflict until 1914. Write that down, 1914. My A students, you're all taking notes here, right? A students, B students, C students, sleeping D and F students in the back. I'm glad you came up to the front, Ken. You're an A student. This is fantastic. Yeah, okay. Oh my gosh, he's really moving up. Yes. Where's your hat? Where's your economics hat? Go get it. Okay, so Henry Ford gets in front of his board members. There's only 4 or 5 board members, but let's assume all of you are board members of the Ford Motor Company. And I am Henry Ford. Gentlemen, only men were board members. Gentlemen, I have great news. January 1914. Last year, we made $30 million. What do you say? Yeah, you're jumping up and down, you're applauding, and so forth. It's fantastic. Now, as board members, we get to vote on what we're going to do with this $30 million. We have 3 choices. Number 1, retained earnings. Why don't we just keep all the money ourselves, and we will use it to improve the assembly line, maybe open up another plant, maybe we'll invest the money in some other alternative investment, we'll put it in the stock market. There's lots of things we can do. All in favor, raise your hand. I don't see you participating. All in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed? Okay, every hand needs to go up. Every hand, raise every hand, students. Everybody get your hands up because they all voted for it. Fantastic. Okay, choice number 2. You're all long-suffering shareholders. You've been with me for 10 years, 20 years. You're board members. You all have stock in the company. We've never paid you a dividend. All in favor of paying you a dividend, raise your hand. Yeah, okay, every hand went up. Every hand went up. Fantastic. Okay. Choice number 3, a bit more controversial. Why don't we pay our hard-working workers more than what they get right now, $2 a day? That's all they get, $2 a day. I say we raise the wages of our workers. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, put your hands down because not a single one voted to raise the wages. And what was their argument? And by the way, they argued this for 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours at the board meeting. Well, the biggest argument was, why should we pay workers more? We get plenty of workers who line up and work for the Ford Motor Company at the equilibrium wage of $2 a day. So we don't need to pay them anything more. That was essentially their argument, the equilibrium argument, that labor is being paid. We're paying what everybody else is paying. Ford turned to his accountant and said, well, let's just see how much profit we get to keep if we raise the wages from $2 to $3. Figured it out. The result was, well, you make $27 million this year instead of $30 million profit. Well, how about raising it to $4? Figure that out. Well, you get $24 million in profit if you pay your workers $4. So after 2 hours of debate on this, finally Henry Ford said, well, you know what, gentlemen? I'm the majority shareholder. So I'm deciding tomorrow $5 a day for every worker, minimum work at Ford Motor Company. Guess what? Made the front page news. Everywhere. Not just in the United States, not just the New York Times, but all around the world, Henry Ford made news. And what was the result of this decision to share the wealth for the very first time in American history by a previously called robber baron? And the answer is the next year they made record profits because the workers were more productive. They didn't call in sick like they were doing before and pretending they were sick. They worked harder, they became more productive, and they were better workers. 2,000 workers showed up, potential workers showed up the very next day to get jobs, and nobody was quitting. Okay, so it had a tremendous positive response to the point where Henry Ford Motor Company made more money the following year and the year afterwards. So it was an extremely important point. But what was the catalyst? Why was Henry Ford able to pay higher wages? Minimum wage? The law passed a minimum wage? It's the cart before the horse. You have to have profits first. Profits must come first, and then you pay your workers more. In fact, study after study shows that workers earn a higher income in companies with higher profit margins. So profit margins is really the key. And it is trickle-down economics, if you want to call it that. But it's a very powerful concept of win-win situation. And this was the development of called the stakeholder philosophy that has been vilified, unfortunately, by libertarians who don't understand business. You need to have a successful company, and I'm sure many of you who are in business know this. You have to satisfy your workers, your customers, your suppliers, your executives, your stockholders, all of them. It's what John Mackey calls conscious capitalism, or what I call democratic capitalism, stakeholder philosophy. So unions did not create weekends, 8-hour workdays, a living wage, 5-day, 40-hour work week. Henry Ford did. So the two arguments against capitalism by the Marxists were exploitation and alienation. Exploitation is we exploit our workers and we don't share the wealth. Alienation is you're working for the man, not for yourself, and you often can't buy the product that you're making. In this case, at $2 a day, nobody had a Model T who were workers. At $5 a day, they started buying the Model T Ford and driving it to the assembly plant in Detroit. So in one simple day, Henry Ford destroyed the two biggest arguments that made workers revolutionaries, and zeal had that revolutionary zeal that the Marxists depend on to revolt against capitalism. He destroyed the argument for exploitation and alienation in one fell swoop. And the Marxists to this day call it Fordism. Fordism. And they don't think of it in a positive light, believe me. So, what are modern day examples of democratic capitalism? Well, it's especially companies that pay stock options. So Microsoft has made 12 million regular employees, secretaries, staff members. We're not talking about top executives. We're talking about ordinary workers being made millionaires because of their stock options plan that Bill Gates decided when he first started the company. Home Depot is another that has made 3,000 employees millionaires. And there's many other companies that engage in profit-sharing programs that share the wealth. And there's no question, the evidence is overwhelming, that companies that have higher profit margins pay their workers more. That's why wages go up, is because of the ability of corporations to pay their workers more. And you put the cart before the horse with minimum wage laws. So the key is not to raise minimum wages. The key to success is to make companies more efficient and more profitable. And you can do that with tax cuts and with other ways, deregulation that makes companies more profitable. So this is the strategy. Now, Henry Ford thought he actually became a crude Keynesian after that. He said, the key is to raise wages. That's really the key. And in 1930, there was a big meeting with Herbert Hoover at the beginning of the Great Depression, and Henry Ford brought in all the workers. And all the workers came in, all the CEOs came in and met with Herbert Hoover, and he said, listen, keep wages high, keep wages high. This will be the key to avoiding the Depression. And Henry Ford went along with that for a while. The argument was, well, if they keep wages high, the workers will continue to buy automobiles and other goods. And they didn't, because workers knew that we were entering a depression. And they withheld that cash, and they socked it away, and didn't spend it. And so Henry Ford eventually had to lay off workers and cut wages in the Great Depression. So that was an unfortunate example, but it was very, very instructive to realize that it's profits that have to come first. That's the catalyst for wage increases. You have to have that coming first. So this is an important message for students. Students walk away from this lecture with a much more positive view of democratic capitalism. And granted, nobody's perfect with this kind of model. There are all kinds of shenanigans. I'll give you a perfect example of Jeff Bezos with Amazon. So Jeff Bezos decided to play up with the $15 minimum wage idea. And several years ago, he said, big announcement, $15 minimum wage for Amazon workers. Aren't I great? And he had 750,000 people lined up after that to work at Amazon. But in the fine print, he left something out. You know what it was? He removed stock options for his employees, except the top echelon. So it's things like that. So capitalists are not perfect. They make mistakes. Back in Henry Ford's age, there was no MBA program that teaches the stakeholder philosophy. Henry Ford is really the person who got it started. But it's a very powerful argument. Students are looking for something to hold on to that gives them hope about modern society. And when you look at democratic capitalism, it fulfills their need of sharing the wealth and so forth. So this is a great quote from Shalom Matal, MIT managerial economist, Israeli economist. The health and wealth of a large number of individual businesses, small, medium, and large, determine the economic health and wealth of a nation. When they succeed, managers create wealth, income, and jobs for large numbers of people. When they fail, working people and their families suffer. It is businesses that create wealth, not countries or governments. It is individual businesses that are either competitive in the world economy or unable to sell in them. It is business that decides how well or how poorly off we are. This is a message that does not get out enough, and when we do send this message out, it's going to transform the world. Thank you very much. There's a quote from Adam Smith, little else is required to carry a state to the highest degree of opulence, but peace, easy taxes, and a tolerable administration of justice. Not perfect, tolerable administration of justice. And I would add to that sound money to fully develop the Adam Smith model. And Wesley Mitchell has some quotes there as well. We have time for some questions. Ken?
Why do you use the word democratic capitalism? It seems to imply that...
Go ahead and give him the microphone.
Why do you use the word democratic capitalism? It seems to imply that the government and democracy, voting and all, has something to do with it. Or do you mean it just in a broad sense that the people are closer involved with the whole operations? How do you mean that?
Well, I use it for two reasons. One is most of these students are Democrats, so they relate to that. Oh, they say, oh, this is the democratic version of capitalism. I like that. So there's method to my madness in that respect. But I also mean it in the traditional sense of everyone benefits and not just the top echelon. Okay, that's my argument. So now John Mackey says conscious capitalism, but nobody knows what that means. I mean, you ask students, what is conscious capitalism? I don't know what that means. But democratic capitalism, they say, oh yeah, everybody benefits. They understand that right away. Question over here in the back. By the way, this is kind of the model that I try to focus on.
So with a libertarian audience, it's not ideal to criticize the word capitalism, but of course it's invented by the opponents of capitalism, and it seems to imply that people with a capital are preferred and everyone else gets second or third.
Yes. So there's a lot of words have, it is interesting to see what words have strong negative connotation. If you just put the word out, capitalism in itself, you have a lot of the student surveys show a negative view. However, if you say entrepreneur, I think someone talked about that, entrepreneurship, that's very positive, okay? So entrepreneurship is one that I use a lot. Students, there's no negative views, it seems, regarding entrepreneurship. Free enterprise is not a bad word either. Free enterprise does seem to be okay, but free market seems to engender some criticism. So words are important here. I still use the word capitalism because without capital, you have no progress. So capital is the most important part of the free enterprise system because that's savings, that's not consumption. If you don't save money, if you don't have capital, you can't really advance. So I think Marx was correct to call it capitalism instead of free enterprise. And it's a term that I would like to continue to use for that reason, okay? Yes.
Yeah, Mark, obviously you and I have talked about John Mackey and Raj Sisodia, who was the co-author of his great book on conscious capitalism. I've had the chance to interview both of them, as you know. And the ideas that you're talking about as stakeholder capitalism, I think came from probably Edward Friedman about 1983. Does that sound about right? Mm-hmm. And yeah. There is a pushback on Wall Street today, as you know, that just says you just don't understand that it's all about shareholder value. Shareholder value is first, profits are first, blah, 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 blah. But they don't get, and what you're talking about is true, what they don't get, that focusing on the stakeholder capitalism like you're talking about increases the shareholder wealth. And so your ability to communicate that to the students and to the corporations is extremely important. So I encourage you to continue.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's, I'm telling you, I've given this talk now dozens of times, and in every case, I have a major shift in the view of students regarding capitalism with the terminology that I use. Yeah.
Hi, Dan McLaughlin. One of the things that we have a problem with is that even the term stakeholder capitalism has been captured. So stakeholder capitalism for a lot of people doesn't mean what you're saying it means. It means including in the environment, including all the other peripheral things that...
Oh, no, I do include that. Environmentalism, if you look at the wheel of business that John Mackey creates and that I create for my students, the community where environmentalism shows up is right there. And I use as an example major corporations. When you go around a neighborhood and you look at where are the best kept lawns and beauty shown in a community, it's businesses, it's major corporations that make sure they have a really good looking environment. So to me, I think that's really, again, these are, you need to, yes, there are excesses in environmentalism, no question about that. But you want to paint a positive picture as much as you can regarding stakeholder philosophy and what we mean by stakeholder philosophy. So the community is very much a part of that. And I use the example of Whole Foods who uses 5% of its profits, no more, but 5% of its profits to give to local nonprofit organizations that are engaged in bettering the community. Again, students love that. They go into Whole Foods, very positive attitude with John Mackey, who's a top libertarian.
Yeah, I think the thing is, though, that the co-opting of the term is like the World Economic Forum. They're promoting socialism with that term rather than capitalism. That was my point.
They also are very critical of capitalism and stuff. So I try to use terms that the students really like, okay? And then I try to be more specific. And I think our previous speaker talked about persuasion versus force or coercion. And I really also emphasize persuasion involved in how companies are in the business of persuading people to buy their goods and services. They can't force them to buy it.
Would you object to the term propertarianism?
What is it?
Propertarianism.
I don't like to use words that I don't want to create a whole new word. Ludwig von Mises did this with praxeology and stuff like that, and whenever you use these terms, you have to define it and stuff. I want a term that makes students feel like they can understand it very quickly and spread it around and use it among themselves.
Wonderful. I think that's all the time that we have available for questions today. Okay. Mark, thank you so much. Please give a round of applause for Mark.
I would like to mention one thing. I've written a summary article about everything I know about capitalism and free market economics in one sitting. It's called Economics of Life Made Simple. And it's it was a cover story that I wrote for Skeptic magazine. And I have never had more response. I mean, the response on this article has been fantastic. So if you go to Skeptic magazine, skeptic.com, you can read it online. And I have some copies. And if you go to skousenbooks.com, you can buy copies of it if you'd like to circulate it, which many people are doing. I've printed up over 5,000 recently. So that's my only commercial.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.